Hello. Today we're going to talk about citation in the natural sciences. We use the CSE, or Council of Science Editors, style in most of our writing. However, we also use the APA, the American Psychological Association, depending on the source or outlet that we are submitting our paper or work to. You'll notice a lot of overlap between the CSE and APA styles, and hopefully this video will show you some of the interesting things about the CSE format, including its flexibility. We use citations a lot in the sciences. We use them to show the historical progression of ideas, to situate our work, and to also build our own credibility as a scientist by citing the most important papers in our particular field. We also use references sometimes as shortcuts. For example, if we're using methods that have already been described elsewhere, we can use citations to refer our readers to those other papers for a fuller description of our methods. In CSE, there are three main documentation systems. These are very similar and refer to how you organize your references and how you refer to them in the text. These are the name year, and I'll show you an example of this where you simply use the last name and year of the publication. The citation sequence, and this is what I refer to as in the order that they appear, and the citation name. And this is your sort of standard alphabetical list of references. So let's look and see how this is actually done in the literature. So here's an example from the first line of one of my papers. And at the end of this line, you can see that I have a list of references. This is the name year style. So you see I've used the last name of the authors and the year. These are ordered in chronological order. In the next example, you'll see in the citation sequence, I have labeled those references 1, 2, and 3 in the footnote. This is because they are the first three references that I've used in this paper. In my list of works cited or references cited, I would then order my citations in the order in which they appear. In contrast to the citation name, this is where you would start with a list of your references, alphabetize those references, and then number them according to the alphabetized list, then refer to those numbers in the text. So here you see I use 13, 7, and 6 because on my list of references, that's the number in which they appear. So here I have a paragraph from one of my papers, and I have cited a bunch of papers in here, which you can see over there. And what you'll notice is that I'm using the name year format, and I've ordered my references in chronological order. There's something else interesting to note here. That's the last reference, Duguay et al., 2007. Why do I have et al.? So I've already talked about the chronological order, which you see here up at the top. But here's an interesting thing. If you have more than two authors, you don't want to have to list everybody's last name. So for more than two, you use the first author's last name and then et alia, or et al., which means and the rest. You will use most of those authors' last names in the list of reference, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Finally, if you use direct quotes in the CSE style, you want to include a page number. And this is how it would look in an in-text citation, where you would put the page number after the year. This is very similar to what Meryl talked about in the APA style. Here's what a reference looks like in my list of references. This is a very basic reference, but what you can see here is that I have a list of authors. This list is in order in which we appear on the paper, but what you will notice is that my initials come after my name, and my colleagues' initials come before their name. This is just a little interesting thing that CSE does. Now, what if I had 15 co-authors? It is not uncommon for some of the papers in the natural sciences to be authored by a whole lot of people. This really depends. The journal that you submit your work to will let you know how many authors you're allowed to list. Sometimes they'll have you list the first one and everybody else is et al. This is in your list of references. Sometimes they'll let you list 3, and sometimes they'll let you list all of them. In any case, you would want to list the authors not in alphabetical order, but in the order in which they appear in the actual publication. After you've figured out how to list your authors, then you include the year, the title of the paper, the journal in which it was published, the volume, and then the page numbers. Interestingly, there are several different ways to do this in the CSE format. And again, this is very journal specific. So sometimes if you're submitting to a journal, you might abbreviate the title. So this would be probably Nat Area Journal. Sometimes you spell it all out. Sometimes you italicize it, sometimes you don't. Again, this is very journal specific. An interesting thing is if you look at Science and Nature magazines, which are the most common sort of famous journals in our field, you will see that they use the citation sequence style for in-text citation. So the footnotes are the references are in the order in which they appear. And then the actual references are very abbreviated. Most of the time they don't even include the title. The journal is abbreviated and the page numbers are given. So take a look at that to see a very abbreviated version of the CSE format. In terms of document design for CSE, I have some good news. It's fairly flexible. Unlike some of the other styles, there aren't a whole lot of guidelines for how to design your document. However, there are some good fundamentals to have when you're doing academic writing in the natural sciences. One is that using a 1-inch margin seems like a pretty good idea. Another is to use headings. So I would consider margins and headings to be formatting that assists your reader in getting through your text. So you don't want to, it's very easy, especially for those of us who have a lot to say, to stretch out our margins, to cram a whole lot of information in a short amount of space. So we use margins and double spacing to give our reader a break, particularly when we are going through some fairly technical material. The headings we use for our major sections, the introduction, methods, results, and discussion, but also subheadings can be really useful. And it's important to set those subheadings aside with some formatting. Very commonly you will see major headings in bold, subheadings in italics. You want to indent your paragraphs a 1/2 inch and set your quotes aside a 1/2 inch on both sides if you have a relatively long quote, to give your reader a little bit of a break and let them know that was written or said by somebody other than you. Tables and figures can be really interesting, and we're going to talk more about this when we talk about visual images in writing, but a couple of guidelines are to either put your tables and figures on top of the page on which they're referred to or on separate pages. We'll talk more about this in a few weeks. Finally, CSE provides the basics, not the specifics. It is one of the most flexible styles, but it also means you need to pay attention to the particular outlet that you're sending your work to so that you can make sure that your references are in the right order as far as they are concerned. It does take some time to learn to read scientific papers. Because we tend to use so many citations, it's hard to read the text in the midst of all these citations. So you want to do some practicing, and reading a bunch of introductions of scientific papers is a great way to do this. Introductions tend to be the most heavily cited parts of a paper. Finally, I just want to note that when we write for the public, we often will use a different citation strategy. We think about our audience different and use citations to educate our audience, not to overwhelm our audience. For more information on the CSE, Bedford St. Martin's has a great website that will go over everything that I've showcased here and give you a few other ideas for using CSE in various formats. Thanks.